Hey, welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with. It's the interview series presented by WFPK at WFPK.org, Consequence, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Thanks as always for making your way here, checking out the series. Of course, you know what to do. If you like what you see, what you hear, hit that subscribe button. I put out 3 new interviews every single week, new one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So it's a great way to keep up with your favorite artists, discover those new ones, any of the places you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can grab us at NPR, WFPK.org, Consequence, or of course, right here on YouTube for the video versions. Anywhere you get your podcast from, you can subscribe to Kyle Meredith with. And that's me, Kyle Meredith. Today, I get to talk with director Francis Lawrence about the new Hunger Games movie. It's The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is a prequel to the original series. This is set 65 years, I believe, before the events with Snow and Katniss Everdeen and all of that. And it's an origin story about Snow. It's an origin story about the villain. And that's what we get to talk about. Like, how do you approach something like this? Because, you know, we sort of we kind of know how it ends. I mean, he eventually becomes a bad guy. So it's really about how we get there. And man, does he do a great job. I really, really enjoy this movie. So Francis and I, we get to talk about the music, which plays a much bigger focus this time around, and special Rachel Zegler being the songstress. We've seen her in West Side Story. She incredible voice, gets to do the music that was written and produced by Dave Cobb, one of my favorite producers. So that's going to be a big talking point that we get into. We also get to talk about how this movie sort of reflects what we're seeing in the real world, maybe in an amplified way, but in a similar way that the original movies did as well. So that's there. We're going to talk about some of the actors. Tom Blyth is in it. He plays Snow. We also get some great work from Peter Dinklage, Viola Davis, Jason Schwartzman, just to name a few. So let's do this. We're talking The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It's Kyle Meredith with Francis Lawrence. Hi, Francis.
Hey, how are you? Sorry, I'm looking at the albums you've got there.
I'll say at the top that I'm such a big fan of the music videos that you've done in the past that I feel like this somehow ended up appropriate today.
It's nice. Yeah, it's very cool. Who's below Prince? I can't see.
That's Bowie right there.
Bowie, right? Yeah, I just saw the name. Yeah, Bowie.
REM, Depeche Mode. Yeah, we got the. Nice. I try to keep it classy around here.
Yeah, we were just talking about Depeche Mode today.
Well, let me say on the bigger subject at hand here. What a fantastic movie this new Hunger Games film is. You know, we as fans never know what we're going to get when we go into this. It's something like a prequel, especially. I came out of it thinking, I think I like this even better than the original run. Like this darkness, this whole story. How much did you want to consider the original movies when going into something like this?
You know, I'm always considering them, and I think, you know, part of what's in the DNA of this movie is you are getting a lot of the origins of the things that we know from the other stories in the movies. I think you're learning new things about characters that, you know, end up in the other movies. And so I think once you've gone through this experience, you can kind of go back to the other stories and movies, and you might think of certain things in a different way. So in that way, I was considering the other movies. But part of the fun of this one, and when I knew there was a new book and that it was set 64 years before the first of the books, that I had an opportunity to like really do something new, you know, to sort of world build in a very different way and look at kind of like a reconstruction era of a city post-war, and to think of the, you know, the hair, the makeup, and the wardrobe completely different. Obviously, it's a very different kind of story on its own too. We're telling the origin of a villain. So it was a really new way of making a Hunger Games movie that felt really fresh.
Yeah, that world building, by the way, like, I don't know if you would call it retro futurism specifically, but I love that look.
Yes. Yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah. Well, and I'll get to the villain, you know, but as we were just talking about this, I want to go ahead and bring up because the soundtracks were iconic the last time around, and there was music, of course, you know, and Jennifer Lawrence with The Hanging Tree. I'm here in Louisville, so hometown girl. Little shout out there. But music gets to be so much more of a focus this time around. I try to follow anything Dave Cobb puts out, and when I heard that you were working with him on this, how did you want the music to be a part of it? Because it's one thing to be on the page, right? To make something original come to life can be a little tricky.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that Suzanne had like a very strong sense of what the music was going to be like, right? And District 12 is, if you look at America, really basically West Virginia, and so you get that kind of Appalachian sound. And she's a huge fan of country music, has a lot of knowledge of it. She turned me on to the Ken Burns documentary of country music, and so I really fell in love with that sound, that like Carter family sound, all from the 20s and the 30s, Mabel Carter, the Carter Scratch, all of that. So we then decided to work with Dave Cobb. Dave Cobb obviously gets, all of this. And I had conversations with him about the sound and the feeling of the songs. And Suzanne had conversations about her references for the songs that she created. And then Dave went off, and it was so fun to watch. He went off and he wrote the chord progressions, the melodies, and put this great band together with, Molly Tuttle on guitar and, based on the orchestration of what this band would be. And he wrote the songs, so Suzanne did the lyrics, but Dave did the music, and they recorded it in this like house in Savannah. So it's not, in some big recording studio or something. So it had that kind of, as he would say, that sort of Alan Lomax recording sound, like you're on a porch somewhere. And then Rachel, who's an amazing singer, sort of fell right in. We didn't know how much sort of fine tuning we were going to have to do with her to get that sound for the specific genre we were looking at, but she got it instantly. And then was able to sing everything live on the day. So that was, it kind of came together seamlessly. Dave would probably say there was more stress on his part because he was actually writing the music. But from my perspective, it really was a seamless process.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered that. Like when you're casting, finding someone who not just can sing, because lots of people can sing, but can sing something like this. I mean, we've seen Rachel do some stuff in the past, West Side Story, et cetera, like that. I mean, she is, when it comes out of her mouth, it's incredible. Like I felt what the characters were feeling,
right,
in those first scenes.
Yes.
When you say it came natural to her, I mean, is that like she steps in and like she gets it?
Well, singing is very natural and very easy for her. And I think that the only thing we worried about was whether or not she could like hit the tone. Because, West Side Story is a very specific kind of music and tone, that sort of Broadway sound. And this is, that sort of authentic Southern West Virginia kind of sound, which she totally nailed. But what she's also really good at, and what helped with her singing live, is that then she could bring the emotion of being an actress in a very specific scene into the music as well. And that's where I think she just kind of nailed it.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier about how I think what you were saying is how you got to reconsider some of the stuff from the original movies because of the story you were telling. When we talk about the songs and the Hanging Tree became so iconic.
Right.
And it gets to kind of make a little sneak peek back in this movie here. Does the theme, I mean, I guess I'm talking like how the themes speak to each other. Is that one of the moments where it gets to do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think part of the fun of this and, the sort of origin aspect of this movie is you get to see the origin of the Hanging Tree. The Hanging Tree became such a favorite song from the other movies, and with Jen singing it. But, when she was doing it, the whole idea is that she's not a performer. She's not a singer. She's just a normal girl who's singing a song that has been passed down through generations. Here we get to see, it's actually created by Lucy Gray, right, who's been to a hanging at the Hanging Tree. So we get to see the Hanging Tree. We get to see the Hanging Tree in action. We get to see the girl who's writing that song for the first time. And there's even little subtle differences. I think Dave, I forget exactly which one, but Dave like shifted a note here or there from the melody a little, so it's just slightly different than the version that Jen sings.
Yeah, well, especially, in the old folk style, I mean, 65 years, things are going to change a little bit.
They're going to shift a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Of course, on to Snow, and this is the origin story. And to some degree, it's a prequel, and we know how he turns out, right? I mean, to some degree, you go, well, this can't end well. So it's more about the journey, I guess, getting there. But I will tell you that I spent most of the movie really liking him, and somewhere in the back of my mind going, maybe it'll turn out different. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe Titanic won't sink at the end this time. That's got to be tricky though, right? Because, from your point of view, I mean, the story's been told in the book, sure, but from your point of view, you have to lead us somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, we know and knew going in we were dealing with having to tell the story of the person that everybody hates from the first series, right? Because he's the villain of the first series. And everybody's going to know where he's going to end up. And it is part of the journey, like you said, really figuring out how that journey becomes surprising. I think the trick was making sure that we created a character that we could get the audience behind, that we could get the audience rooting for, and that we could get the audience empathizing with up front. We have to, though, at the same time, make sure we have the breadcrumbs in there of his need for ambition, his need for power, the greed, all those elements, the darkness that's within. You have to understand that stuff's there so that when you get to the end and you see him go dark, which is very satisfying, that you believe it and then it feels honest and authentic.
And Tom was so good.
Yeah, he's great. Yes.
I was just watching. I'd just seen him in the Billy the Kid series that he had done, I think, last year. And oh, man, kid's got range.
He does. Yes, he does. He's a very, very talented actor.
Yeah. Those original movies, whether they meant to or not, ended up speaking for an era, especially in our own world, that seemed to be an amplified thing. As I think about this one, and especially what we've seen over the past few years in the rear view, do you find that this movie gets to speak for something like that in this bigger social political sense?
I do. I mean, I think, one of the things that Suzanne does best is she always writes these books that are like thematically based. She finds themes and things she wants to talk about and write about first, and then creates the stories and the characters around them. And, the first set of books were all about the consequence of war, which sadly is always relevant. This one, she started to sense sort of a polarization, not just of the United States, but a polarization of the world, where people are at sort of extremes, and decided to write a story about the state of nature debate, right? This idea of like, are we as humans innately savage and brutal, or are we innately good and deserving of rights and freedoms? And it's unfortunately always a relevant debate. And so I think that's what makes it relevant now. But, the truth is like these have been relevant themes for thousands of years.
Yeah. But here we are. And that's exactly how I come out thinking, like, I'm still seeing this, and it's interesting when we look back on eras too, looking back in time and you see all the art that came out that didn't mean to speak as this one thing, but, the Margaret Atwood stuff, in the past decade and something like this, like I'm trying to see us 10 years from now and looking back and I don't know if you even allow yourself to do that, like what this movie's going to mean 10 years from now in the past.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, my goal is always to sort of entertain and have a sort of satisfying piece of storytelling. But also, you ideally want people to sort of think and feel the kind of heft and weight. But it's always hard to predict later. I mean, I will say, being a part of the Hunger Games, and when we were coming out of the Mockingjays, and suddenly there were all these like sort of rebellions around the world, and people started using the three-finger salute from the movies as kind of an act of rebellion. It's moving, it's scary, it's sad that there's the need for that. And so but that's not something we could have ever predicted.
Right. Which is just incredible when that kind of takes off on its own.
Yes.
I
mean, that salute in some countries actually became illegal.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, because it was a sign of rebellion.
Wow.
Yes.
That's something to, yeah. Yeah, but to some degree, it's, as songwriters say often, once I write the song, it's out of my hands.
Exactly.
But to see what that comes to mean on top of that, like that's got to be some kind of, I don't know if weight's the right word, but it's heavy.
It is, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I also want to, mention some of these other folks, Jason Schwartzman, Peter Dinklage, Viola Davis. Any line that comes out of their mouth, it's incredible watching them act. Yeah. Do you have to do much work when directing these folks?
No, I mean, honestly, I think more of the work with these people is up front, right? So, when Viola came in, it's like sharing like the thematic tie her character has to the themes of the story. I had some references for the kind of, character I thought she was, and you sort of find this kind of shared vision. And then collaborate, and then luckily, when they're that talented, you kind of get to sit back and watch. Jason was a little different in that he was really game and he signed on, but then I wanted to kind of enlist him to help build the role out. A lot of what you see in the movie was not in the script. And so he worked with me, he worked with the writer, Mike Leslie, and really did a lot of research in, newscasters, weathermen, hosts, vaudevillian magicians, and pulled all these little details and then came up with a bunch of ideas. And so there was a lot of work into coming up with the stuff. And we have hours and hours and hours of more footage of Jason trying different things. So, it's like on the day with him, it's more picking and choosing like what stuff to try. With Viola, it was really having those initial conversations and then like, okay, now go do your thing. So very little, ideally with any actor, you have very little adjustment on the day.
Yeah, it's incredible. I love the whole movie. Francis, thank you so much for doing what you do and especially taking the time to talk about it. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to my guest. Also, thanks to you for checking out the episode in the series. Before you get out of here, hit that subscribe button. Again, you get 3 brand new interviews every single week. New one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at right here on YouTube, or of course anywhere in podcast land, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, NPR, or WFPK.org as well. A great way to keep up with your favorite artists and discover new ones as well. Then after that, actually head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's an hour full of song premieres, music news, anniversary spins, bonus interviews, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern at WFPK.org. Consequence has your music and film news. You can also find me on the social media spots, Facebook, Instagram, mostly on Twitter. All 3 of them, the address is at Kyle Meredith. Do hope you like and follow along. That does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.